Hey, what's happening everybody? My name is Haydn Adams with A Designer Who Codes. I recently finished redesigning my own website because, it was about time after so many years. I felt like it's almost like the cobbler's no shoes effect with graphic designers and web designers, that their sites kind of become the last thing they do. After working all day designing clients' work, their sites take the back seat. And so I gave myself a full week to redesign my site. And in doing so, I wrote two pieces of code that involved the CSS element initial, where I said margin top initial and margin bottom initial. And it comes from designing this H1 at the top of my portfolio page. I wanted this kind of as boring as possible, so you focused more on the elements down below. And when you got to different pages, like the home page, you got this more robust H1 at the very top and the H2 below. So the home page, about page, and contact page all have the H1 and H2 with this image behind it, but the portfolio doesn't. And I want to talk about why I wrote the initial and initial in terms of this CSS and why I didn't just zero out those numbers. And with that, let's get started. So I think the best way to start out this whole entire design is to take out or to comment out what I did with the initial pieces. So let me comment these out and let me save them, and I'll come back to portfolio. Now these, or I should say this page won't change because it doesn't contain a header black overlay. That is reserved for the home pages. So if you look at it, this is what I was faced with. This dark color, it's almost black, it's like a dark brown color I used. That's the same, of course, as this H1 right here. Now I wanted to design this page without affecting this one over here. And so all my designs, if you watch in previous videos regarding my Gatsby background video, I use a black overlay. And the black overlay, if we look at it, if I scroll back up to the very, very top, only the black overlay does is it just provides back overlay. Now in these pictures, I went into Photoshop and did them manually, and then I forgot to actually apply the back overlay. So eventually, if I want to make them darker, I can say 0.8, and what's going to happen is it'll turn my entire design to 80% black. Right now, those pictures were all done in Photoshop and they were already pre-darkened, so I'm just keeping it there as a neutrality. Also, I have a header going on at the very top, so it's header black overlay when it comes to this piece right here. So I wanted to, move this type up closer to the H1, as this is the H2, and I also wanted to make them white. So if we go back down to the H1 and H2, wherever I have these pieces, let me unselect them right here. So I made the color white for the header black overlay H1 and the header black overlay H2. I also added a bit of a shadow. I kind of like popping my designs when it comes to overlays. So if I had it 0, looks pretty good by default at white, but I feel like just giving it a bit of depth to it makes a big difference. So I just added a 50% white for the alpha. And what that does, it just gives it a bit of a pop off the page. My whole entire strategy for drop shadows is that they should enhance, not save. That was my entire mission when I talked to my students, especially first semester freshman students, was if your design doesn't work without a drop shadow, then it'll definitely not work with a drop shadow. The drop shadow I put in, it was just more to enhance the white type on top of the image. That's all it is, nothing more than that. But what I wanted to do with the margin top and margin bottom is the H1 above it, not so much on the H2. There is H2 margins as well. So if we go back and take these out, let's just comment that out. And I'm going to head over to Chrome. And if we look at it and we inspect it, come on, inspector. I'm going to turn off the mobile site as well. So the H2 does have a margin down below, and the H1 has margins top and bottom. Now, that's also because the H2 doesn't have it right here, but I am using React Bootstrap. And React Bootstrap by default adds, if we look for it down here, I gotta find it somewhere, but the type.scss, which is part of React Bootstrap, if you see it says Bootstrap, it says bootstrap.scss for the Sass. So that area does contain a margin bottom going on. And so what I want to do is I want to remove that. I want to go back all the way up. Now I can't say the word inherent. And the reason why, if I say inherit, by trying this one, it's not going to work. That's because the inherit only goes one level up to its parent. And we haven't gone far enough up the food chain to knock out that margin bottom where it's going to work appropriately, because the H2 also has other elements, the H1. So the inherit doesn't work. What I have to do is I have to go all the way to its default and go to initial. And initial, go there and go there. What the initial does is it allows it to go back to its default state. So if I save that, now what happens is by default there is no margin on the H1 or the H2. Now you could also say that you could say easily 0 px and 0 px, and that would zero out the margins as well. And you could do it that way. But if I wanted to change an inherent state somewhere else, I locked in this where it's never ever going to change. I have to find that somewhere else down the road. I like using initial because it goes back to its default setting without having to zero out anything. Now, if I need to override something to say 0 for a reason, that's one thing. But by default, I prefer the word initial over inherent for sure, because it won't work. But it also takes out the space here without affecting the portfolio. If I say initial here and the portfolio. And that's how I use initial versus 0px. The inherit word takes it up to its parent, and initial takes it back to its default stance, which of course was 0 for margin top and 0 for margin bottom on the H1 and H2, allowing me to work from there on out if I want to do anything different. So it's not forcing it 0, it's forcing it back to its default setting. And that's how I used that's how I used initial in my project to redesign my website.